I've lived in the same house all my life, and since I was a kid, my mother would tell me stories of the ghosts she would see before I was born. Her and my aunts have both seen a face in windows, both describing an elderly gentleman with a top hat. The face that they saw was never malicious or menacing, but just someone watching. After looking through several family photo albums, they saw a picture of my great-grandfather and it was the face they kept seeing. After discovering the identity of the ghost, my mother felt general relief because at the time she was pregnant with me, and my parents had a difficult time with conception, so she felt like she was watching over her while pregnant as a guardian angel of sorts. One night, she woke up to see a figure in the doorway to her room. Instead of the immediate terror a person would normally experience, she felt calm. Even when the figure walked closer and closer to the bed, finally sitting next to my sleeping father in the bed, the figure promptly vanished. After that night, they never saw him again. Fast forward 22 years, I'm sitting dumbfounded, hearing these stories for the first time, feeling genuinely bummed out that I never got to experience any of this. Now, at this time, I injured my shoulder and couldn't sleep in anything but a recliner for 6 months while I recovered from surgery. So I took our entire basement and turned it into a mini apartment. After about a month, me and my girlfriend Emma started hearing the door to the upstairs close loudly at random points during the day and night. The fridge would be open for no reason, and motion lights we had at the top of the stairs would trigger on and off. All of these things were explainable enough. The old house making noise, bad lights, didn't close the fridge enough, a million different explanations. It started happening so much, I would joke that the ghost was back, and I had decided its name was Fred. One night, me and Emma were home alone, and I left to go get dinner. When I came back, she looked visibly confused and annoyed. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Well, Fred played a little joke on me while you were gone." This piqued my interest greatly. "Do tell." "When you left, I heard footsteps coming from upstairs, so I thought you'd forgotten your keys or something, so I came to see what was going on. But when I came upstairs, you were not there. Then I heard footsteps coming from the 3rd floor. I yelled up and nobody answered, but I heard the footsteps again, so I yelled up, 'All right, Fred, I'm not playing this game anymore.' Then nothing. She went back downstairs and I came home a few minutes later. The footsteps continued for the next couple of weeks, and we just got used to it shouting, 'Knock it off, Fred.' Whenever it went on too long and got annoying, which would always make it promptly stop. Till one night, around 2 a.m, we had a couple of friends over, and from upstairs, we heard a very loud bang. Now, my parents both have very bad knees, so immediately, me and Emma rush upstairs thinking one of them had just fallen down the stairs or something. But the main floor was dark, with nothing out of place. 'Mom?' I tentatively called out, and from the 3rd floor, both my parents yelled down asking what happened. They had been in bed for the last hour, and heard the crash and thought we or one of our friends had drunkenly knocked something over. Keep in mind, none of us had been drinking at all. After verifying that my parents were okay and nothing was out of place, we both made sighs of relief. I have to pee. Emma ran to the bathroom. "Babe, get in here now." I ran in to see what was wrong, and boy had Fred struck. Laying in front of the toilet was the mirror normally mounted on the wall above the toilet, face down but unbroken. This was not possible. The mirror easily weighed 20 pounds. The frame was made from old logs chopped in half. This mirror was big enough that it would have broken the toilet, let alone not have the glass shatter. And even stranger, on top of the toilet, there were little knickknacks, all of which were undisturbed. Again, completely impossible. My brain launched directly into problem-solving mode. How could this happen? I checked the nail on the wall. Solid, did not budge an inch. Checked the back of the mirror, just as solid. I remounted the mirror, waiting a few seconds to make sure it didn't fall. It didn't. I tried to recreate in my head how this could have happened, but the only conclusion I could reach is that someone took the mirror off the wall, held it a few inches off the ground, and dropped it. High enough to make a big bang, but not high enough to break it. Well, after all this, Emma had enough and said that she was going to get rid of Fred. He's getting too ballsy with this stuff. The following week, she blessed the house with sage, all the while saying to Fred that he was unwelcome for now, if he was going to be doing things like this, but that if he could behave, he could return later on. After the blessing, we didn't hear from Fred at all, until about a year later. I came home from work and my rocking chair was rocking like someone had just stood up. I tried walking around and recreating how I came in to see if maybe I just rocked the floor a little bit, but nothing. Alright, Fred, you're welcome to stay. Just don't do anything stupid or out you go again. So far, nothing since the chair has happened, but who knows what Fred has planned to make sure we all know he's there. I grew up in a small California desert tourist town called Joshua Tree, home of the Joshua Tree National Park. Those of us that are older called it the Monument, as it was before National Parkdom. I was in my early 20s at the time of this, which was approximately 15 or 16 years ago, and was the only one with a car and license. Growing up in a small desert town leaves you with limited options for fun, and we would make use of the park. Occasionally, maybe once a week or so, a group of us would pile into the station wagon with beer, smokes and a mixtape, and drive through the park late at night. An empty road, so dark and quiet other than the loud group of guys in a red Mercury driving fast from one entrance to another. Hours would go by each time as we drove the long, desolate road and stopped at various rocks we liked to climb. I can't overstate how desolate it was. How alone. No other cars, no lights. Except the occasional lonely unmanned roadwork sign, when warranted. Hell, that was exactly what we thought it was. This trip started like any other, except maybe more of us than usual. Crammed in that car, windows down as I chain smoked and drove a good 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. Gravel spitting up as we had a good time. Shortly into the trip, I saw a light. A blue light. Possibly, and it was, miles and miles ahead. That's the thing about dark. Light is free to shine for miles. I remember saying something about having to slow down at some point ahead. There must be some road construction left by itself up ahead. Had to be a sign that I hadn't moved. We continued for a few miles to one of our favourite stops and got out. We climbed for a while, maybe 45 minutes or so, drank a little, joked, the norm. Then we piled back in and continued. Let me be clear, this light never moved, and we had already been about an hour into our adventure. Why would the sign have a blue light? As we approached the light, I started to slow, and slowed more and more as we approached the source. It wasn't a sign, it wasn't a car, it wasn't a UFO. Standing on the side of the road, facing towards us unmoving for over an hour at this point, was a man. A pale white man, white beard, dirty old miner clothing with an old mining helmet and a pickaxe. Period appropriate for a time long before the park was anything other than desert, with some lovely mines. His light gave off an unnatural and bright blue light. His face was blank, but he stared at us, directly at all of us. We sped up, and as we drove by faster, his head turned to keep pace with us as we left. His light was visible, unmoving once again, facing us the entire trip out. Once again, it never flickered or moved. He wasn't translucent, but the saying as white as a ghost applied to everything about him other than his clothes, pickaxe, and light. I remember looking at the car clock shortly after passing him. It was damn nearly exactly 1 a.m. when we passed. We never saw a car, hell, a horse, any way for this old sickly pale miner to get into the park. nor any reason for him to leave. Any means of transportation would have been visible if nearby. Worst of all, we estimated that this miner had to have been standing there facing us for at least an hour and half never moving. The eeriest part by far was how still he had been the whole time, waiting, perhaps, to see us. Not once did that light flicker as if he looked down for a moment or turned his head. He just stood there staring down the road at a car full of dumbasses. Even when we parked, headlights off and climbing some rocks while balancing a beer in one hand, he started from miles away into the darkness in our direction. It would have been no more than darkness to any human that far away without our headlights. We never saw him again. However, a few years ago, I decided to check out to see if anyone had experienced the same. I found one story of a couple that saw him near the park we did. Standing there, staring late at night, found another story of people camping out in the dark away from standard camps that saw the silhouette of what could have been a miner walking closer by. As I wished we would have stopped. Even if it would have been the most horrifying ever. I wish we would have stopped because I honestly believed there was a ghost of a dead miner out in that park, and I would know for sure today. Plenty of unexplained things in my life, but the visage of that miner still fresh to today. If anyone ever wants to test their luck, both on seeing the miner and seeing what he may be doing, take a trip through Joshua Tree National Park in Southern California late at night or early in the morning. You'll probably be alone on that road without cell reception, so be smarter than us and don't take the risks we did. Make sure to slow down your approach, return for Keys View, which is where we saw him and where the other story of him was. Look for a blue ghostly light during your trip. "2017. The Dungeons. Berlin. We queue up until we get a tour of the Lady in White, also known as the ghost of Hohenzollern. No spoilers. So there was an actress in the dark, dressed in white, screaming while the lights flash. And then they tell us the story of the ghost. Definitely worth seeing. I liked the Berlin Dungeons, and there's a lot more to it, but I'm keeping it relevant anyways. After this, we go about our day seeing other parts of Berlin and the city. We were getting to the end of the day. It was a cold day and the weather was miserable. We walk a little further out of the river. So we're crossing this bridge, and as we're walking, we're looking out to the river and enjoying the view. I took my eyes off of the river, and when I turned to face the path, I couldn't quite believe my eyes. Walking towards us was a lady, no taller than 4'6", remarkably small, almost childlike. Her complexion is pale and her hair is almost white. She was very slim. Her face was flawless. She looked to be aged about 16 to 18, but it was hard to tell. She wore nothing but a white veil over her hair and a Victorian-looking nightgown. She walked barefoot. Her feet and ankles were covered in soot or ash and so dirty when they were black. What followed was fighting, and when I think about it, tears run down my face. So we make eye contact. I was drawn to her eyes, staring at me. This state was not a stare of interest, or as if she wanted to ask us something. This was a stare of hatred. She stared into my eyes like she wanted me dead. She stared so intensely, I felt she could see right through me. Her stare lasted about 3 seconds or until we passed each other. So, there are other things that can happen. I can't explain why she was dressed in a Victorian-style nightgown and veil in miserable, slightly cold weather. Even the homeless wore warm coats and were fully dressed. I can't explain why her legs and feet were black as coal. This wasn't dust or dirt. This had to be coal. But modern cities are no longer coated in soot from burning coal, so how did her legs and feet get so black? Why would someone stare at a stranger like they wanted to kill them? It wasn't just my interpretation. Most people would look away if they were caught staring. This lady kept staring at me. I can't explain why there is no trace of this lady online or on social media, considering she walked through the middle of Berlin, her appearance, and the history of the White Lady ghost. I don't understand why there is no trace. I read on the Berlin Dungeons website, the appearance of the White Lady only meant one thing: definite death. Does that explain why I felt like she wanted me dead when she stared at me? But this experience had not turned me into a believer of ghosts, but it's made me believe in the possibilities of ghosts, which I honestly thought I would never say, and I will feel more inclined to read ghost stories and not just doubt it all. Feel free to share your thoughts or theories. I've thought about from her being an actor from the Dungeons, to her being a lure, to her being a hippie, but nothing, at least not yet, has hit the nail on the head or even come close to feeling like a possibility. But weird things happen in the world. Maybe it's just one of those things. If I could go back in time and find out, I would. That was until the night of the 23rd of December. I couldn't really sleep that night because I'd been working a late shift and was still kinda in an energetic mood. Weirdly though, that afternoon when I was sitting on my bed putting my shoes on, I could have sworn I felt someone touch my foot from under my bed. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I just remember thinking, oh god, that's weird. But it was the middle of the day and I was running late. Anyways, that night, once I did finally get to sleep, I kept being awoken by scratching noises. That sounds a lot scarier than it is, because we always get mice in our attic in winter, so it really wasn't anything new or scary. However, the third or fourth time it woke me up, it startled me because it sounded different. This time it sounded like, I guess I would say it sounded like someone really lightly running their finger along the wall. Not scratching it or anything, just like someone really, really lightly running a finger along the wall. I also noticed that my wardrobe door was open. In my culture, there's a lot of superstitions surrounding specifically wardrobe doors being open. I actually have a string keeping it closed, which would have to have been untied to open the wardrobe. This immediately made me think something spooky was afoot, but I was so tired that I was just happy to ignore it. Anyways, I turned on the light and of course, there was nothing to be seen. So I got a drink, took a few deep breaths, and went back to sleep. I then awoke at 7 lying on my side facing the wall. For some reason, I got this overwhelming urge to turn around, and before I knew it, I was already turning over. I noticed that there was looked to be a shadow man. I'm not sure why, but I had the distinct sense that it was male, standing about 1 meter from the side of my bed. I got the feeling that it was facing me, but peculiarly, it had no head. It wasn't like it had been decapitated or anything gruesome like that. It just had an uninterrupted line across from one shoulder to the other. As well as that, I remember it not having any hands, like its arms just extend in a sort of rounded point. I also immediately noticed that it was quite small, maybe 5 feet tall. Probably less, I'm 5'11", and I could tell I was a decent bit shorter than it. I didn't feel threatened at all at the time. I just saw it, thought, oh wow, this is actually happening. And then immediately thought, this isn't what I imagined you would look like. For reference, as a child, I remember frequently seeing a huge figure pretty often. So in my mind, that's what a shadow person was supposed to look like. Anyways, I then kind of snapped out of it and drove for the light switch. This meant passing by the entity in order to reach the switch. It didn't move or run or anything. It just stood still. When I passed it though, I did notice a coldness in that area of the air, feeling thick or dense. That's the only word that I can think of. As soon as the light was on, it began to fade into like smoke. But there was still a clear outline of it for a few seconds. The best way I can describe it is like, you know when it's really hot outside and you can see the heat waves rising off the road? Yes, well, it looked exactly like that wavy air, but in the shape of the shadow. I'm from Ireland, and assuming this was one of the sea, I asked to leave in Irish. I then felt the newfound sense of dread momentarily lift, but when I sat back down on my bed to kind of process my thoughts, I felt a rush of cold air come towards me, and I did feel a sense of anger or annoyance. But I can't explain where or what it was coming from, almost as if the air was angry at me. Naturally, I decided that this was a battle I was not willing to fight, and left the room. As soon as I closed the door, though, I noticed that my two pet ferrets were both wide awake and had all of their fur standing fully on end. I brought them both into my room then, and they both immediately started hissing and puffing their fur up at something. I've never in my life seen them act this way, so it really did freak me out. I've been hoping to just pass this off as some sort of hallucination, but their actions unfortunately made me feel quite justified in my fears. I was initially worried that it was the feared Dorcher of Irish folklore, a shadow man of the Sai who acts as a warning of your death, but it doesn't fit any of the descriptions of him from our mythology, which honestly was the best Christmas surprise ever. Fully thought I was a goner for a while. About 3 years after my mum had to put our dog to sleep, due to rapidly worsening illness he had, she always felt like he was hanging around. She never actually saw him, but he had his habits of sleeping next to my parents' room door, and there was occasional bark, or thus she always exclaimed. One night, my dad woke up because he had to go to the toilet, went out the room door, only to trip over something, slapping his whole body against the wall, shouting loudly, "Damn it, Ray, I told you countless times to not sleep there." My mum, woken by the noise, with the utmost calm, deadpanned my dad by saying, "But dear, Ray's 3 years dead." She then proceeded to lay back and watch my dad to return to bed, sweaty and white as a sheet, looking at my mum. "But Lucy, I swear to God I felt fur on my feet." At this point, my mum only laughed. The last thing she said was, "I suppose I'm not the only crazy one now, am I?" After this experience, my dad never called my mum crazy. Now when something strange happens, my dad just lets my mum handle it without saying anything. I have to say, I'm really sorry I don't remember this firsthand. But every time my mum mentions this, my dad is looking kinda startled. Luckily, we always laugh at this point. It's not a scary story for us, but I always like to hear it again, because my mum always shows gratitude that nobody is calling her mad anymore because of this. When I was younger, I had a black German Shepherd named Benjamin, Ben for short. He was the most loyal and friendly dog, but had big scary performances whenever there was wind crying through cracks or fireworks were cracking outside. We lived at the time in a block of flat on the 10th floor, all solid panels, so not much noise from neighbours could be heard. This story happened 7 years ago at a New Year's celebration, half a year after our dog Ben passed away. Everything was normal. Me, my fiancée, mum, dad and my best friend were celebrating New Year at our flat, watching fireworks beginning to shoot from our window. Everything went alright for a few minutes, until one of our blasted neighbours decided to throw out some homemade explosive, which made a really loud bang. Suddenly, my best friend turned and screamed for her life. Me and mum turned to see what had happened, only to see this dog-like black mass jump down the bed, positioned across the window, followed by shattering glass sound. After initial shock, we decided to check up if the glasses for champagne fell and shattered or what, only to find nothing has been broken, but my dog's memorial photo to be flung across the room to the other side of the bed, from left, and it being put under mum's bag, which is usually pretty heavy because she tends to have too many things in there, without being broken or even slightly cracked. None of us can make sense of how it got there and what that black mass was. Me, my mum and best friend were the only ones to see the black mass, and my fiancé and dad to be additional to hear the shattering glass with the rest of us. After a few minutes of trying to rationalise what had happened, Mum weighs it off as it was probably just Benjamin being scared of the loud firework. We laugh it off despite knowing damn well Ben is dead for half a year, and continue to enjoy our New Year's celebration. Logan is her ex-boyfriend, then boyfriend at the time. Ronnie is her ex-boyfriend's friend and old roommate. Kaylee is Ronnie's ex-girlfriend. Margaret and Cleo are her old cats. Tell me about your scariest experience at Silver Creek. The scariest? So, the scariest thing was one morning I woke up and it was like 3 a.m, because that was when Logan would be working. So I was home alone and I went down to the kitchen. And that's where a lot of energy was from, because remember, like, that basement? So it was around that area, so I was chilling, making coffee, and I felt this unexplainable touch on my shoulder. So I turned around so fast, because I thought something grabbed my shoulder, and there was no one there. So I grabbed my bong and ran out the door. One time, Ronnie, who used to live there, woke up in the middle of the night and heard old music playing down in the living room, and the music stopped playing when he went downstairs. Logan and Ronnie never believed that much until Ronnie experienced that, because Ronnie's girlfriend got too scared to go in the bathroom alone or be in the house alone. We'd be upstairs on the main floor, and then the dirt bike got kicked over and there was glass and nails, so I started to search. And I found this old dream catcher that gave off so much negative energy, which is so weird for a dream catcher. And then I saged the house before the dream catcher, because I was like, the fuck? And things stopped happening for a month. And then things started happening again, so I spoke out. It's okay, whoever you are, just stop scaring me. Because the music, lights go off, crashing of glass, things being thrown and stuff, the doors slamming, children writing, were all scaring me. They were scribbles of children's drawings along the kitchen. Down the road, there was a triple murder-suicide house. There's not much to tell, but the main story was that the kid killed the mom, and the dad and then him killed himself. But then it was the dad who killed the kid and the mom himself. So it's undetermined. But sometimes if you pass that house, you can see a white face in the window staring at you. So I'd be chilling and Margaret and Cleo didn't get along that well. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night and they'd be standing by side, staring at the same thing and following something with their eyes, and always acting weird and scared, like they were hypnotized. So one night we felt like Ronnie was in his room, and he was really depressed from his breakup, and he was standing at the foot of his bed with a loaded shotgun. And he wouldn't listen to me and Logan. Had to shake him to wake him out of it, and he realized he was holding a fully loaded shotgun. He didn't know what came over him and didn't remember, but he said he was trying to kill himself. In Ronnie's room, it was really weird, and there was a chimney in the closet with cobwebs on it, and it led up to the top of the house. After Ronnie moved out, we kept everything in his room. He just had a shotgun and an old bed, and I heard things moving up in his room, and the shotgun was moved from his old mattress to leaning against the chimney. The bottles in the basement would be thrown against the wall, and there were always dead rodents and frogs in the basement, and they would always be found dead right at the edge of the basement stairs. One time, I was in the living room watching a show. I didn't even feel safe when there was sunlight or when there was daytime at all. It was a constant negative, weird energy. One day, I was really sick and I had a cold, and I thought I could hear something talking to me. And I turned around really fast, and it was like a big gust of wind blew through the house. I got so scared I called Ronnie, and I said, "When are you coming home? I'm so scared right now." And I'd always hide out in the truck because I didn't want to be alone. And also one time, Kaylee, Ronnie's ex, said that Ronnie went downstairs and she heard someone tapping at the bedroom door, and she heard whispering sounds of someone imitating his voice, and it wasn't even him. It was like a shapeshifter kind of thing, a skinwalker. I always found fairy rings out in the yard, and maybe they weren't fairy rings. It could be something else pretending to be. I had the constant fear of knowing you're being watched, and it was true. So in July 2020, I visited an abandoned farmhouse near where I live. The place itself wasn't that scary until we entered the middle of the house. This part was completely dark. There was no natural light anywhere, so we turned on our torches. Things seemed to move. A chair would move a foot or so to the right. The ladder in the front room would creak under the weight of a person, but there was no one there. We found nothing of it because we didn't know the house was haunted until I posted my video to YouTube, where I had loads of fellow Urbex explorers telling me the real history of the building. A father had murdered his 2 young children and hidden the bodies in the basement, which after his trial had been sealed completely. And the mother hung herself in the upstairs bedroom. It's rumoured that the mother haunts the upstairs of the house. Most say she isn't violent, but she doesn't like people entering her room. In fact, her room is the only one which has decayed so badly that the floor has dipped into the front room. However, it was not her ghost we encountered the second time. Once I knew all of this, I went back. A foolish decision, but a decision no less. This time I wanted to make contact. I hoped to speak with the woman, ask her what happened in that place, why she can't move on, etc. And if she wanted to talk to us. For a while, we walked around the house. We would hear things. A scuffle of feet, like that of a person too tired to properly pick their feet up. Slamming doors upstairs. The old basement door would move and creak. There was no draft. And so, before we lost courage, we opened up a speaking app. I personally wasn't sure how well it would work. What with it being a free app on Play Store. But we began to politely talk to the ghost anyway. Every now and then my phone would click, the screen would go blank, and static would play loudly. I began to get spooked out. Then my cousin said, "What if a ghost tells us to get out?" And that's what happened. As soon as she finished speaking, a yes violently came through my phone. A chill ran through my whole body, all at once. It hadn't been the woman's voice. It was the angry, hostile voice of an older man. We screamed and ran out of the house so fast. Once outside, I had to take a moment because I felt as though I was going to throw up. We ended the session on my phone and left. The building is due to be demolished later this year after laying abandoned for around 30 or 40 years or so. And yet, since I spoke to the entity, I've had the same dream every night of a slightly different building. Nothing in my dream ever changed, until last night. A window had been broken and a dark, shadowy figure beckoned me forwards. That's when I woke up. I haven't felt quite right since going to that building, and I will never be going back. My oldest brother grew up in Sierra Vista in the 1980s. Sierra Vista is a border town in Arizona, and during that time it experienced some heavy drug crime and some light violence. You know, normal border town stuff. Well, my mom was a single mom, and they briefly lived in a very shady trailer park in a single wide mobile home because it was all they could afford. Trailers were run down, things weren't meeting codes, and you didn't have to pass a background check, so many of her neighbours were criminals. There was a drug dealer and his girlfriend living across from them who was pretty abusive. You would hear them fight and she would leave, and he would hunt her down and bring her back. The girlfriend's death was played off as a suicide, but it was widely believed that he had murdered her just to give you a better image of what type of place it was. Soon after moving in, my mom woke up in the middle of the night to my brother chit-chatting. He was sitting cross-legged on the middle kitchen floor in the dark. My mom stood there for a moment, listening to him, giggling and talking before saying his name. "Jimmy, what you doing? Who are you talking to?" "My friend. Talking to my friend." "Who is your friend?" "The man." The man? What's the man's name? I don't know. You don't know? He lives under the ground. The man who lives under the ground. My mom scooped him up and took him back to bed in her room because it freaked her out. This went on for a few weeks. She'd wake up to him sitting in the kitchen in the middle of the night, and eventually he started going onto the porch talking to the man. He would just sit there talking as if someone was actually there. One day he comes crying to my mom. He's scaring me. I don't like him anymore. I don't want to talk to him anymore. Don't like who? The man who lives under the ground. And like that, almost every night, he became absolutely terrified of him. He wouldn't walk to the bathroom by himself because he had to pass the kitchen, and he definitely didn't go into the kitchen at night anymore. This is particularly abnormal because, as far as I know, children don't get scared of their imaginary friends because they make them up themselves. They are who they want them to be. My family has two theories about this whole experience. Theory 1 is that the man who lived under the ground was a spirit of someone who was murdered and buried under the kitchen. Theory 2 is that there was actually a man living under the trailer and speaking to him through the vents. I don't know which one is more terrifying. My mom and my brother promptly moved out, and he never had the experience again. He's 35 years old now, and only remembers talking to a shadow. This happened when I lived in a house that always felt very odd. And I don't want to say it, but it felt somewhat haunted. We'd always have unusual events such as exploding light bulbs and things thrown at us during the night. I should mention that on numerous occasions, we would all claim to see the same shadow creature frantically brush past our feet, as if it was a rabbit that was running from a fox. We brushed it off as just our imagination and tiredness. We kept many pets, such as birds, rabbits, and the occasional slug that somehow made its way into our dining room. We didn't keep those, FYI. On many occasions, our pet rabbits would freak out and hide in the one corner of the room as if they were attracted to the same spot. They wouldn't ever go near this specific corner of the living room, and if you dared try putting them near, they would kick and scratch and run away from it. There's so much I could tell you, but I'll skip to what you people would call the fun stuff. So I was young, prone to these really powerful recurring nightmares for some reason. Normal diet and even more normal lifestyle. Sometimes after one of these nightmares, I would crawl down from my top bunk bed and make my way down the cold ladder in the pitch black of night. And I'd call for my parents and I would jump into bed with them for the rest of the night. So this one night, another nightmare hit me. It was one of the worst I've had. I jump into my parents' bed with them, who by the way are both facing the same direction, towards my right. I'm on the far left side of the bed, facing left. After at least 15 minutes of staring into the void of the darkness, my eyes had started to adjust. I could make out the shapes of my mother's wardrobe and my father's football gear. He was a football coach, not a player. At some point, I must have opened my eyes after nearly falling asleep. Kind of like when you have that hypnic jerk just as you're about to fall asleep, but you have that crazy fast panic attack and you inhale. I hope you know what I mean. So I opened my eyes, and after a minute or so of regaining my bearings, I caught a glimpse of a moving pattern. This really freaked me out. It didn't have any distinctive features, except that it almost looked like it had tentacles, like an octopus. It sounds ridiculous, I know. As soon as I saw this weird thing, I pulled the duvet over my head and faced my parents' direction. Now listen carefully here, because this is the best part. The position I was laying in was like a curled up on my side kind of position, with my left arm under my pillow and my right arm down between my thighs. Somebody or something grabbed my hand, which was under the pillow, and gripped it very tight. Almost like that grip your uncles give you when you haven't seen them in ages. I yanked my hand several times until it gave way, and I called for my parents to wake up, because obviously at this point I was terrified. It wasn't my father's hand, and he was the parent closest to me. He couldn't have reached from his position facing right all the way to my hand, considering whatever grabbed my hand came from the edge of the bed behind me. Hopefully, this isn't too confusing so far. Boom! The light bulb at the top of our staircase blows up. Glass everywhere. My brothers get their phones out and switch all the lights on, confused when the one bulb doesn't turn on. My parents already have the lamp on by this point, and there's nobody or nothing in the room with us. My roommate and I have lived in this one-bedroom apartment comfortably for a little over a year now. When we first moved in, it was owned by some lady who was scared of it burning down. There had been one apartment that was ruined by smoke mostly once. And we have 3 fire alarms within 2 feet of each other near the back of the house because of the landlord. The majority of the time, everything is pretty normal. No strange dreams, no banging, none of that. But what does happen is strange. We were given 2 keys for the house when we moved in. They both curled at a round angle, like an arched finger. One of them only curled at the tip. One happened while my friend had it in his pocket while he was out skating. Then when he went to use it on the door, it was bent. Next, I know I lose some things like we all do, but some things seem to legitimately disappear completely every now and then. Usually it's when we have people over. It's something we're using and have been using all night, and then poof, gone. I was once in the bedroom with my ex, and in the morning the door opened and closed like 15 times. It was truly the most insane thing I've ever seen. Even talking about it makes my hair stand up. It happened so fast, never completely closing every time, just quickly swaying back and forth. I have a nightstand thing with shelves next to my bed in the living room, and I have this massive rock on it, and one night it just fell straight off, out of nowhere. Scared the shit out of me. It made a super massive loud crash that made me jump straight off the couch. It's not much of a story, I guess. There's more to it all, but I just figured I'd say something because I think about it all the time. I just wonder what's going to happen next. Always kind of a long time in between events. Almost just enough to where you forget they happen completely. One night, an uncle of mine was walking home. The sun was just starting to set, and in Lagos at the time, there weren't many streetlights. So when it got dark out, it got dark out. My uncle had been told by Abwe, Dad's mom, many times not to stay out too late and be home before the sun goes down. My uncle was a very stubborn person when he was younger, according to my dad, and always blew off everything my Abwe would say. On this night, he definitely should have listened to her. And if I'm not mistaken, he did after the events I'm about to retell. As he walked, he saw a man standing on a street corner. The man looked at my uncle and said, "You should get home, kid. It's getting late." My uncle, being the jackass that he was, said, "Screw you, old man. Don't tell me what to do," and went about his leisurely walk home. After a couple of blocks, my uncle saw the same man standing on a different street corner. The man said the same thing he said before. My uncle didn't think much of it, told him to go fuck himself and continued walking. After a few blocks, my uncle saw the same man, but this time he had a big snarling dog with him. The old man said the same thing, this man with the dog growling and baring its teeth. My uncle was a little more bothered this time, understandably so, but still told the old man to shove it and kept walking. He was nearly home at this point. The sun was gone, the moon bright in the sky, and then he saw him again. This time he's just laughing maniacally. Not only is he laughing, but he has 2 dogs now. According to my dad, my uncle said the dogs and man's eyes were red, and as soon as my uncle walked past them, he heard the man let the dogs go. He took off, running as fast as he possibly could, the dogs barking, snarling, and giving chase. As soon as my uncle reached my Abwe's house, he started pounding on the door, furiously begging her to open up. Once the door was opened, he flew inside and told her to shut it fast. My abway was trying to figure out what was happening, and my uncle told her about the man and the dogs. My abway said he was being ridiculous and said there's nothing out there. She opened the door and saw nothing, but my uncle swore that he could see the dogs pacing outside back and forth, teeth sharp, eyes red, fur black, and waiting for him. When I was in high school, my senior year, I was helping out with the school play. A girl I liked was in the play and asked if I could help, so of course I said yes. Well. One night after rehearsals had concluded, I stayed back in order to organise the prop room. I had major OCD back then. A few minutes go by, and I hear the door to the stage slam shut. Something to note about this door is that if you closed it without propping it open, you'd surely lock yourself in and be screwed. So, being the nice guy that I was back then, I walk over, prop the door open, and step inside. I can already hear my Mexican ancestors calling me a pendejo for going towards the noise. Anywho, I walk onto the stage and start calling out, asking, "Hey, anyone there?" Everyone already left, so time to go. You know you nearly locked yourself in here, right? It was silent, except for the boom, boom, boom steps I was hearing on the stage. I didn't only hear them, but I felt them through my shoes and it shook me. I thought nothing of it and kept asking who was around. Still no responses, and then I started hearing what sounded like someone running up and down the aisles. After a while, the spotlights started making noise as though someone was playing with them. At that point, I figured my friend Amy was messing with me, so I texted her and asked if she was fucking with me. She said no. I said bullshit and she FaceTimed me. She showed me she was in her room and said, "Yep, I left my comfy bed and comfy pajamas to mess with you." I apologised, said we'd talk the next day, and hung up. After what felt like an eternity, the spotlight stopped. The running in the aisle stopped, but the stomping on the stage didn't. They felt closer and closer and closer until it felt like they stopped right behind me. I felt a breeze on my neck and thought, okay, has to be wind. Then I felt 3 sharp nails land on my shoulder, one at a time. That was the last straw. I bolted out of there faster than I ran any 3-mile run I ran in the military afterwards, grabbed my backpack and ran as fast as I could out of the theatre building. I live in historic district Savannah, and for anyone who doesn't know, Savannah is very haunted, especially the section I live in. My apartment is from the mid-1800s. My boyfriend lived in the studio apartments in our building, and then a one-bedroom apartment was available on the lowest level, so we took it. I expected some weird noises and minor stuff, as my boyfriend said he's experienced it the year before I moved in, but nothing crazy. But some weird-ass stuff just suddenly happened. Besides recently feeling the phenomenon in our place, the activity seems to be happening in the bathroom. My boyfriend has been hearing noises constantly late at night, while I'm sleeping. And funny enough, I told him how the bathroom has freaked me out for no reason. Well, just today, the weirdest thing happened. Our new and unused white soap dish that sits on a platform up high above everything, with all the teeth cleaning stuff, my contact fluid, etc., randomly was filled with what looked like pee. Musty and had that pee smell. To the top with 0 spills anywhere, and our new toothpaste was floating in it. I mean pee colour. I brushed my teeth at noon Sunday. My boyfriend brushed them before me, and I put the toothpaste next to the mouth rinse, not in the soap dish. Then this morning, my boyfriend goes, "Why is the toothpaste floating in our soap dish?" It's a big deep one, by the way, with yellow liquid. We watched it go down the drain and it was pure pee, smell or not. You could tell. We created it by filling the white soap dish again, clear and white. We hadn't even used the bathroom all Sunday, because we didn't come home until like 8 p.m, went out again, and came home at 11 p.m, went to bed. Neither of us brushed our teeth last night because we both passed out. I used the toilet but didn't touch the shelf. He didn't either. We have no friends here, and our windows have bars and don't even open, an issue our landlord has been addressed about. We also have security cameras and 3 locks. There was pee in the soap dish, filled to the top, on a shelf with the toothpaste floating in it. There was no other substance or anything anywhere else. Nothing was wet, just in that soap dish. I refused to smell it, but my boyfriend did and said it was musty, like pee. And if someone were to prank us by putting pee or even water in that dish, it would have fallen everywhere because it's high up and was filled to the brim. Like there's no way a person could pee in a soap dish and then raise it above perfectly laying it on a shelf and then add toothpaste in it. It sounds nuts and silly to care about, but something like this is strange. Who even heard of such a thing? Can a ghost even pee? I'm 29 weeks pregnant and I wake up consistently throughout the night due to having to pee a lot. I always feel like someone is watching me from the kitchen, which can be seen from down the hall when you go to the bathroom. A little backstory. My husband and I live with my father-in-law. His mother passed away in October, and we were very close. Then, in my son's toy room and father-in-law room, which is right next to our bedroom, I always feel eyes on me when I walk by. No matter if I'm home alone or if anyone is there. I always feel like somebody's watching me. The other day, I was in the bath watching YouTube, home alone. I hear someone walking in the house and hear the fridge door open then shut. My father-in-law was hunting, husband at work, son at his mother's house, and my dog's paws were visible under the door because she has separation issues, especially with me pregnant. My husband doesn't feel it, but my father-in-law said he never feels alone either. My son, 3, says there's a ghost in the kitchen and in the walls. I don't know if I'm more sensitive because of being pregnant, but I've always felt like I'm never truly alone, no matter where I am. My husband is a pest control technician, and he normally has to drive pretty far out in the woods to do his job. One day, his GPS took him to an old abandoned Freemasons building, which the GPS said was the firehouse he was supposed to be servicing. While he was slightly confused, he figured it was the right address and started spraying for bugs. When he gets to the back of the building, he sees a basement door open, like one of those doors that are technically in the ground, but lead to a basement under the house. He told me he could hear what sounded like someone walking, but he just hollered down into the basement that he was just a pest technician doing a job. He then hears what he explained to me as a monotone voice say, "Hey, I need some help." He said it didn't sound like the voice was struggling or anything. He just replied saying, "Everything okay? Are you hurt?" The voice just repeated, "I need help." They couldn't see down in the basement, and there weren't any apparent light to see anyone either. My husband is a 6'2", 250-pound man. Normally people don't mess with him or would even try to talk to him, and people don't scare him easily. But he noped the hell out of there. He said the entire time he walked back to his truck around the front of the building, it felt like something was right behind him, watching him leave. He was confused as to why the GPS brought him there, but he eventually found the right place that he was supposed to be at. He called me after he had service to tell me all this. So, M was in our own home, and in his dream, he was getting ready for bed. It was already dark and the moon was illuminating into the house, leaving dark spots. When M entered the bedroom, he found an old man sitting on a bunk bed, rather than the king-side bed we usually have, and no old man. The old man was fragile and shaking. He needed help getting into bed. M helped the old man into the bottom bunk, then proceeded to hop into the top bunk for a good night's rest. When he soon realised, wait, who is this old man, and why am I in a bunk bed? Once this realisation hit, he hopped out of bed to question why this old man was in his house. Except when M looked down, he was standing on batteries. There were dead batteries all over the room, and an old man sitting up in the bed. M asked the old man, what's with all the batteries, rather than why he's in the house. The old man started shaking again. He was fidgeting with a flashlight and some batteries. He looked at M with empty and frightened eyes before saying, we need the light. M started to feel a demonic presence surrounding him. He could feel it getting closer with every breath. The flashlight went out, causing M to wake up to a heavy breath in his ear. He shot up in his own bed, and his heart pounding and trying to catch his breath. M came downstairs to find me, as I work night shift and tend to stay up late. By this time, I had the Ouija board put away and was relaxing in front of the TV. He looked pale and ready to cry. I feel horrible, and strange things started to happen on a regular basis now. I was working the night shift currently as a nurse for about 4 months at this point, so I was up until 5 AM even on my days off. Anyways, I needed a new place to rent, and I was not about to move in with my current boyfriend, as he lived with 4 dudes in a house with only 1 bathroom. My friend suggested I rent out a room from her neighbour, who was about 86 years old at the time and not doing so well health-wise. He said he'd give me cheap rent knowing a nurse was living in the house. I thought saving money would be awesome. Eddie was super friendly and very sweet. So I agreed to move in and decided to set up my room in the basement, so it was darker and easier to sleep during the day. I cleaned it up and liked the fact that it was more private. I didn't have a whole lot of time to settle in due to my work, but on my first night off, I was reminded why people don't like basements. It was rolling around to about 2 AM. I was up watching a movie or something of the sort, debating if I should walk over to the 7-Eleven to buy some greasy goodness for dinner, when I started to hear someone walking down the stairs, quickly. The lights were off and the switch was over by the stairs, so I used the flashlight on my phone to see, thinking that Eddie really shouldn't be running down the stairs like that, but maybe he needs me. So I started to call out his name. Eddie, you okay? As I walk over to the light switch, at first I don't even see him. Then wait, I can hear footsteps walking away from me. I can see someone, something walking the opposite direction from where I was standing. I called out for Eddie once more with a little more shakiness in my voice, because the dark figure I was looking at was no 86-year-old man. It was tall and big, over 6 feet. It looked right at me. It had these reflective yellow eyes that shined from my phone flashlight. I just stood there as it started to, manifest. I snapped out of this trance-like state when it hissed or something at me. I jumped and turned on the light switch so fast, and it was gone. I grabbed my purse and jacket and took that walk over to 7-Eleven and did not come back until the sun came out. I was so scared. That morning I moved my things to the upstairs room thinking that would help. I wish it was a bad dream, but I know what I heard and saw. I thought being out of the basement would help, but it didn't. Eddie's health started to decline a couple of weeks after this incident, and he needed to stay in the hospital for a little while. So I was in the house completely alone. His daughter from out of town came by to pick up some clothes, and I thought she would stay at the house while she was in town. But she refused and said she would rather pay for a hotel. That freaked me out even more, but I wasn't about to let that experience ruin a great place to live. So my boyfriend at the time always offered for me to stay with him. We'd been together for over a year, so it wasn't a bad idea. But he rented out the other rooms in his house to 4 other guys, and it only had 1 bathroom. So even though this house gave me the creeps,
I really didn't want to live in the man cave. Anywho, Eddie was in the hospital, so I was in the house alone for a while. I was still on the night shift and preferred not to stay in the house alone at night. It was my night off once again, and I was in the house alone, reading in my bed and feeling pretty tired from working 7 shifts straight. 4 a.m. was rolling around, and I kept hearing something, like walking or someone dragging their feet. I started to think about the last time I had heard this. My heart started racing. I remember I was even shaking at the thought. I thought staying in one of the rooms upstairs would make a difference, but it didn't help that I was in the house completely alone. I checked out the window that looked onto the street. It was faintly lit up from the streetlights. It was empty. No one I could see walking around at 4 a.m. But I could still hear someone dragging their feet around the house. I was trying to reason myself with this was just an old house. Old houses creaking. Curiosity got the best of me, and I was tired of feeling afraid in my own room. Lifting off the covers of my blanket, I stood up and took a deep breath in. I opened the door to my little room and took a step out. Rather than turning on the lights, I used the flashlight on my phone to check the house. Okay, the main floor was all clear, and I concluded it was all in my head. That is, until it started again, but heavier and in the basement. Just like the last time. It sounds like someone is walking down the steps. I listened intensely as the walking turned into running. I was just standing in the living room waiting for something to appear at the top of the steps. Slowly, I grabbed my coat and purse off the couch and inched my way to the front door. I was crying, thinking the worst. Did someone break in? No, it was that thing again. And I can see its large yellow eyes staring back from the basement stairs. It was growling, deep demonic. I couldn't breathe or move. I was trying to debunk it. It was just the lighting. It continued with that low, guttural growling, and I finally took a breath out. I unlocked the door and ran out of the house. Another trip to the 7-Eleven down the street, then sitting outside until the sun came out. I couldn't spend another night in that house, so I packed my belongings and moved into the man cave with my boyfriend. I enjoyed living in a full house and just learned how to live with the smell. Eddie's daughter was very understanding when I explained that I couldn't live there anymore, and said she's going to set up her father in a home anyways. This story is completely true, and by far one of the worst encounters as an adult. I am and always have been sensitive to the paranormal. I lose sleep. It's located in a small town in Ontario, and was one of the first apartment buildings to be built in the community. It used to have a pool, a playground in the back, and over the years, multiple fires and lots of renovations. It's a 7-floor building holding around 150 apartments. So, we lived in this building because it was owned by a family member, making our rent cheap. Other family members lived in the building and have stories of their own. By the time we moved in, the pool was shut down, and the playground was rusted and sat untouched in the isolated back area. We moved into the 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor. I was around 11 years of age and my sister was 13. We will call her T.O. My mother and stepfather will call M and D. My parents loved the fact it was cheap, and a lot of our family members had already lived in the building. It was also walking distance to our school. My parents worked full-time jobs and had a decent social life. Feeling safe in the apartments and having a lot of family members around, they felt it was safe for me and my sister to be left alone overnight, and even a weekend every once in a while. Because of this, I tend to stay up very late reading, and other things preteens do when they're left alone. Late one night, my sister was in our room sleeping while I was reading in the living room. I kept hearing whispering. I just thought it was my sister on the phone or something. I remember trying to listen in on who she was talking to, or where it was coming from, before realizing it was a man's whisper. Okay, It's an apartment, so it might just be from the floor below or above us. I was about to blow it off before it started to get louder and sounded like it was coming from my parents' room. I quietly put my book down and poked my head around the corner to look down the dark hallway leading to my parents' closed door. They're gone for the weekend, and it keeps getting louder. The voice is saying, "Get out, get out, get out," over and over again. Taking a deep breath in, I stood up and decided to investigate. I walked down the hall and leaned my ear onto the door on my right, leading to my room and where my sister was currently snoring. I continued walking down the hall and held my hand over the handle of my parents' bedroom door. Like out of a horror movie, it got really quiet, and I thought I could hear something moving around behind the door. I started to chicken out and just stood in the dark hallway. My hand was still over the doorknob. A large bang on the door sent me falling back and landing on my butt. It really hurt the tailbone because I was super skinny and didn't have anything to ease the fall. I frantically stood up and ran into my room and into my bed, waking up my sister on the other side of the room. She turned on the lamp beside her bed and glared at me for waking her up. I just crawled under my covers and decided I needed to sleep. The next morning, I was still thinking about it. I thought it was a dream, or I was just overtired from not getting enough sleep. But my tailbone hurt. This was the earliest memorable event I can remember from the apartment. The first sleepless night.
The sleepless nights continued. We didn't live in the apartment for long before discovering it was a hotspot for haunting activities. But it didn't stop me from staying up late, reading almost every night. Close to 3 a.m. on a weeknight, I was in my bed reading once again another book. The Doom Brigade, as I remember being really into fantasy books at the time. I had a bookshelf above my bed for easy access, as I was indeed a bookworm. A 12-year-old girl with a little too much acne and a wild imagination. To this day, I stay up all night as I work the night shift. I can only sleep during the day now, not just because of this story, but other events that would happen at night. Anyways, I put my favourite book away on the little shelf and rubbed my eyes from the irritation. I have a little book flashlight that clips onto the book. It makes everything in the background all splotches. So maybe that could explain things. I was looking around at the weird splotches and blinking my eyes to make them dance. That is, until I noticed my closet door across my room was slightly open, and a dark spot around the handle. I always close the door, and to this day always do and double check. I continued to watch it, debating whether to get up and close the door, but I didn't want to wake up my sister or get out the warm covers. I kept watching the open crack, watching it until it opened more. I really wanted it to be my imagination and the fact I was up all night once again, but I can hear the closet creaking open even wider. The figure emerged further out the closet as I kept watching it, wanting it to go away. I didn't take my eyes off it as it started to manifest into a cloaked figure. My 12-year-old mind wanted it to go away, but it wasn't. It just continues to stand there looking back at me, until it lunged at me, covering my small body in its cloak and what felt like hands wrapping around my neck. I screamed, loud. It woke up my sister in the bed on the other side of my room and my mother in the other room. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt until the next day. When my mother came into the room, I was still screaming and had a pile of books covering me. She had her hands on my shoulders to try and get me to stop screaming. My family concluded it was because my bookshelf had fallen and covered me in books. Why I woke up screaming, but I know what I felt and saw. This was 15 years ago, and I still remember it. Why can't I handle open closets to this day? The building had shopping carts in the lobby, to bring large loads of whatever to different floors. It had an old elevator that will be in the next story. Anywho, I was around 12 years old and I remember being called down to the lobby by my mother to bring up a load of groceries she had ready to go in a shopping cart. I was to bring it up to our apartment on the 4th floor, unload the food, then bring the cart back down. Being a music lover and had just downloaded more songs to my unlimited playlist on the MP3 player I was so thankful to have, I decided it would be a good time to listen to my new music, too loud for my ears. I put on some slippers and walked down the long hallway leading to the elevators, down to the lobby and got the groceries sitting in the cart my mother had left. Back up in the elevator and still had the music way too loud. I think it was a simple plan. I started walking down the hall leading back to the apartment, when suddenly I felt 2 hands grab my shoulders and shake me, like someone was deliberately trying to scare or get my attention. I laughed, thinking it was one of my cousins, and whipped my head around to see nothing. No one was standing behind me. I took on my headphones and just stared blankly into an empty hallway. I almost ran back to the apartment, still pushing the shopping cart. I unload all the groceries and soon hear my mom coming back to the apartment. She reminded me to take the cart back down, but I really didn't want to. This elevator was old and creaky, just like the building. I hated using it alone, but the stairs are even creepier and darker. In the basement of the apartment building were 2 snack machines and a drink machine, always full of my favourite treats. Nothing over 2 bucks back in the day. Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, and maybe it was me being paranoid, but I was around 15 and smoking some weed, about an hour before the munchies kicked in. It would have been easier to eat some of the healthy snacks in the fridge, but I was baked and wanted chips and chocolate. It was around 11 PM on a Saturday night, and I decided to dig into my little change cup for a few bucks and visit the machines of deliciousness. I walked down the long hallway and pressed the button for the elevator. I noticed right away it was louder than usual. But maybe it was just from smoking the devil's lettuce. When the doors opened, it seemed like the elevator was still moving and not yet ready for the doors to be opened. And I should have used my brain and just walked down the stairs, or better yet, ate the healthy food back at home. But I wanted the goods. I walked into the elevator and pressed the button that leads to the basement. The doors closed and the elevator creaked as it started to move down. The lights even seemed dimmer than usual. That's when the whispering started, or what sounded like someone was standing in the elevator with me. Just as I looked around the elevator like I was going to find someone, it started to shake. The lights flickered and it shook so hard I had to grab the walls around me to keep my balance. I felt the elevator drop hard before coming to a slanted stop. You can guess, I was crying by now and just wishing it was a bad trip. But it wasn't. And I'm now sitting in a broken elevator with the red emergency lights on. My heart was racing so fast I could hear it. I pressed the alert button a few times, between sobs mostly, and tried to listen if someone was around. I didn't know what else to do but sit down and wait for someone to notice, late on a Saturday night. Thankfully, someone did notice 2 women coming back from a bar or something. I heard them laughing and chatting as they pressed the button for the elevator. I called down right away and they responded. They told me not to worry and they're calling the super. It took another 2 hours before a fireman had to pry open the doors, leaving just enough space by the floor for me to slip out. For 2 hours, I had to sit in the dark elevator with nothing but my fear. Maybe the whispering was in my head, or sounds from the old building, but being stuck in a place like that was real. Thank you for listening. I hope you never get stuck in an elevator. It all started when I was 5 or 6 years old and had an imaginary friend called Bombo. He was a small Victorian boy who lived with his mother, who I said lived under the floorboards in the house that I grew up in. I used to talk and play with him all the time, teaching him about things like my Velcro shoes and some of the toys I had. It was no secret to my family who Bombo was, and even what he looked like, from how I had described him. One day, my sister, 14 years old at the time, went back upstairs to our shared room after a family day out and saw him, standing in the corner of the room, staring at her, exactly how I had described him, even down to the detail of the clothes. A few years passed, and I was now 10 or 11 years old. Our family had moved house a couple times, and now lived in a 3-story house in a village, just out of my hometown. I always had a weird feeling about that house from the moment we moved in, but didn't think much of it over the excitement of having my own room on the top floor with a skylight. After a few months, things started to get strange, things disappearing, hearing footsteps on the middle floor landing at night, etc. These experiences progressively ended up getting stranger, with sounds like nails being dragged up the railings on the top floor, getting worse and worse, as well as some nights my little sister, 3 at the time, screaming, saying that there was a man growling at her in a room, although my family put this down to an overactive imagination and didn't think anything else of it. It was quiet for a couple of months before everything came back again, but this time it was so much worse. This was the first time I saw it. One night, I was in my room, watching TV and getting things ready for school the next day. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a face peering in at me through my skylight. Its skin was dark red and its eyes were white with no pupils, only veins. Dark circles around its eyes, leading to black cracks across its face. It was grinning at me. Even without pupils, I knew that it had its eyes locked on me. Needless to say, after a few seconds of initial shock, I ran downstairs to the rest of my family and refused to go back to my room. Shortly after this, my older sister, who had given birth recently and was living with us temporarily, had her own experience. As she was sleeping one night, she heard a knock on her door between 2 and 3 a.m. Thinking that I was the one knocking, she shouted, "What?" twice, with no response. The door flung open after a few seconds, with such a force that the dresser had dented the door from the impact. No one was there. Shortly afterwards, we moved again for personal reasons to the house that we now have been in for years. For years, there were no unusual experiences, other than the occasional sound of footsteps, nothing that couldn't logically be explained. When I was 18, my sleep schedule was the same as any teenager, waking up around noon and going to bed around 3 or 4 a.m. This one night in particular, I was up doing the same as always, listening to music, watching films, etc. At midnight, I went downstairs to the kitchen as usual to get some snacks. On my way back out of the kitchen, I saw it again. Standing behind the front door looking in through one of the glass panels was that same face I saw all those years ago. Same red skin, same eyes, same dark circles and cracking features, staring right at me. This time with one of its hands leant on the other glass panel, as it watched me. The only difference with it this time, it wasn't grinning. After standing there for what felt like an eternity, I ran as fast as I could up to my room and locked myself inside. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Some family friends who were regular churchgoers theorized after they had heard what I saw that this thing I had seen was Bombo, or what had taken the form as him in the first place. And when I had stopped giving him my attention and energy, he had then had to use another way getting my attention. But I don't know what to think for sure. All I know is that what I saw was the exact thing I saw as a child. And it came back. It's been 4 years since the last time I saw it. I hope I never see it again. When me and my ex-fiancée were together, we lived with her mother and grandmother. The grandmother had some health issues and needed to be monitored but was able to take care of herself. The first strange event happened about a week or two prior from her grandmother's passing. We came home late one night from a party at her boss's house, and the front door was locked, so we had to go to the back of the house. Both of us had to use the restroom, and I told her to go in, and being a guy, I stayed outside and did my business. Only one bathroom in the house. Now, they had a huge detached garage that was mostly empty and literally only had one bulb light in it. The door was always left open as the handle was broken. While I'm standing there, looking towards this garage doorway, lights up, with possibly the brightest light I've ever seen, but at the same time doesn't illuminate anything around me or the doorway. Immediately I pinched and ran inside out of pure fear. The second event came the night of passing. I was down in the basement playing Arma 2, as it was my day off, and the basement had half windows pointing toward the driveway, which led to the garage. As I'm playing, I can hear her grandmother coming from the second floor to the first floor, which took my attention from the game and to the stairs. I noticed out of the half windows a bright light coming from the back of the house towards the garage, quickly across toward the front, and about 2-ish minutes later, her grandmother collapsed in the living room where we attempted CPR for 30 minutes before the fire department took over. A few years ago, I went to Thailand with my girlfriend at the time. Well, it was more like a resort rather than a hotel. I won't mention the name of the resort, but each room was on a different level on the side of a mountain, next to a beach. I won't mention it because I can't for the life of me remember what it's called either. Now, I swear this room that we stayed in was haunted. I've had previous experiences with the paranormal as a kid, and throughout my teenage years, so I am a believer that there is some form of afterlife. When we first entered the room, it was bitterly cold. Yes, I know Thailand has a hot climate, so it could have been the aircon. But you can tell the difference between when an aircon has been on, hot air rises so you can still feel the humidity, but this room felt like it was below 0 degrees Celsius. I put it off as the aircon, but thinking back on the experience, surely the aircon wasn't first-class technology to produce such coolness. The next thing, I'm trying to sleep. I'm an insomniac, have been since I was 6. And in my left ear, there was this very, very quiet electric guitar playing, like a death metal riff, over and over again. It wouldn't stop. The guitar riff kept playing until I eventually fell asleep. But me, being the metalhead that I am, it didn't bother me that much. And I put it off me listening to my music too loud, too long on the plane ride there. The guitar riff played in my ear every night I was at the hotel. Every night I stayed at the hotel, I dreamt of violence and gore, horrible things. I remember dreaming of murdering people in the worst way possible, way too gory to mention here. One night, I fell asleep, and I was having another horrid dream, and at the end of the dream, there was this white sheet that rose, typical ghost look-alike from old movies, where the ghost is under a white bed sheet. It looked like that. I'm a brave guy, and I started challenging the ghost, and I started fighting it with my bare hands. I remember I grabbed it by its throat and started choking it while yelling, "I'm going to kill you," over and over. I think my sanity started dropping by like the third night staying at the hotel. Unbeknown to me, I was saying it in real life too. It woke my girlfriend up and she started fearing for her life, thinking I was going to kill her, she was saying to me. She eventually woke me up and she explained the dreams I was having and the experiences in the room. She told me she had no experience. That night, after telling her the experiences, I woke up around 3:30 a.m. feeling extremely sick. I had to rush to the toilet and I vomited for about 3 hours. I told my girlfriend to take me to the hospital, but she told me to rest and see how I am in the morning. I woke up in the morning feeling like nothing had happened that night. Now, we moved to another hotel after a few days and everything stopped. No more death metal guitar, no more violent dreams, no more feeling sick. and the hotel was at room temperature. Could this be some sort of entity that lived in the hotel that was haunting, or all pure coincidence? My boyfriend has trouble getting to sleep normally, and even when he does, he still wakes up during the night for whatever reasons, toilet, drink, etc. This night, he was sound asleep, as was I. He was laying on his stomach. He woke me up as he jolted up from his sleeping position and made this really loud gasp sound. I remember asking him if he was okay or what happened, something along those lines, but he had just laid back down and went back to sleep. Neither of us thought anything about it until a few weeks later at his work's Christmas party. He was talking to one of the ladies he worked with, and somehow they started talking about ghosts and hauntings, which is weird because that's not something he's interested in. Anyway, she mentioned this man in a bowler hat that she has seen before, in a different house in a completely different state, and about having a fear of looking down a dark hallway for whatever reason. This is when he becomes interested because he remembers that night and tells us what had happened. So he was sound asleep, but he remembers something waking him up. When he opened his eyes, he saw a man sitting or leaning against his bedside table. It was a man in a bowler hat and a suit, just there looking at him, watching him sleep. That's when he jolted up and made that noise. He later told me it's not the first time he's seen him, but it's the first time that he had really taken notice or remembered about him. After him mentioning this, I start to recall little things that have happened. Like thinking I've seen someone in my peripheral vision, or thinking I've seen just the back of someone as they're walking behind a wall, etc. And then I remember how I also have a bit of a fear of looking down the hallway in our house at night, if the light isn't on. I haven't seen this guy as much, but I can feel some sort of presence. The other morning when I woke up alone in bed, my boyfriend was sleeping in another room because he couldn't get to sleep and didn't want to wake me. And I noticed that the bedroom door was pulled shut. Not completely shut, but just enough so it looked shut. My cat was on the bed, so I knew to get up to open the door for her, to be able to get out. I slid over to the other side of the bed, sat up and rubbed my eyes. But when I opened them, the door was halfway open. No one had opened it because I hadn't moved. The cat was still on the bed, and he was still asleep in the other room. Maybe my old mate decided to have a slumber party with me that night and made a quick exit. I don't know, but it just seems pretty strange. So a number of years ago, my ex-husband and I went and did the night tour of Port Arthur in Tasmania. Before we started the tour, we were told a few rules about it if you're chosen to be a lantern bearer. The two I remember is that 1. If you're at the front, make sure to knock before entering a room, and 2. If you're at the back, close the door behind you, and if you feel a tap on your shoulder, don't turn around. Well, we were both selected, and he was up the front and I was at the back. Partway through the tour, a couple offered to take my lantern, and I sheepishly went up the front to join my partner. The tour was really cool, and I kept taking random photos in corners of rooms, especially the morgue, but nothing other than what I wanted to think were orbs, were probably just water droplets on the camera lens. It had been raining. So when the tour ended and we were all in the front lobby area, the tour guide thanked us for joining and to check the backseat of the car, just in case a ghost was hitching a ride. No worries. We drove back to where we're staying, and I was walking ahead of my ex as he was having a smoke, and there's a half-circle shaped roof patio thing above the door into the motel. While I was walking up to the door, I was also looking up at the roof, and there was a black bust shape of a person, head and chest, leaning over the roof towards me. As I kept walking closer, it kept leaning further over like it was watching me. Anyway, I get to the door and I'm pointing up to the roof and telling him to look up because there's someone up there looking at me. He looks, and of course there is no one up there.
I'm getting a bit freaked out now because I have a super overactive imagination and this was peaking hard. Once inside and walking up the stairs, there were these porthole round windows leading all the way upstairs, and I refused to look out. In our room, the curtains were open, and I closed them straight away because I didn't want to look out. Surprisingly though, I slept really well. The next morning when we were leaving, I went outside and turned around to have a look at the roof where my friend was watching me the night before. There were tools and whatnot on the roof, as there must have been renovations happening, and there was a glass sliding door for access onto the roof. As this is the part that 100% convinces me that it was a ghost, the roof was made using corrugated metal roof sheeting, the kind that creaks and cracks and pops when any sort of weight is put on it. If a human person was on the roof, we would have heard them as clear as day. Plus, being nighttime, the sound would be 10 times as loud. I never had a great relationship with my youngest brother. He's 2 years younger than me. But one night we were sitting on the grass across the street from my mom's house. In front of us was the highway and nothing else. On this green area, in between the street and the highway, were some trees and some light poles, although half of them didn't work. I remember I was sitting there with my brother, having a nice conversation which wasn't that usual. And out of the blue, I felt that somebody was looking at me. So I turned to my right and there he was, in the darkness under a tree. I saw a man. He was wearing brown pants and a red shirt. There was something about the way he looked at us that terrified me. I told my brother, "Don't look, but there's a man under the tree and he's looking at us." He tried to act cool and in the most discreet way he could. He turned into that direction, but then he just stood looking that way. He got me nervous. "Don't look," I said. "No one's there." I thought maybe I mistook the tree for a man, so I looked with confidence and there he was, still looking at us. And by then, he noticed we were looking at him too. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't any of the neighbours. I told my brother that he was under the tree, wearing a red shirt, looking at us. By this time, my brother was starting to sound angry. He told me I was crazy. He didn't care anymore. He looked and pointed at the tree. No one's there. I couldn't keep my head up because every time I looked, the man was there. This is when things got interesting. My mum used to have this cat. She was the sweetest cat in the world. She was a lap cat, a people cat. She loved being held and pet. She loved us. The cat came running out of the house. She stopped in the middle of the street, looked at the direction where the man was standing and growled. Her fur got pointy, and she looked ready to attack. She then ran back into the house, stopped in the middle of the yard, and did that aggressive thing again. My brother and I looked at each other, got up, and ran inside the house too. To this day, if you ask my brother about that night, he'll say he didn't see no man, but he saw the cat. I was walking to my room from the bathroom. Basically, the layout of my house is that this hall comes from the living room and ends with my bathroom. But on the right of the bathroom, looking down the hall, you have my room, and the left my sister's. Now, the switch to the bathroom light is near the door, on the same side as my sister's room, and I have to turn the light off to go to bed. So I start walking out of my bathroom and turn to make sure I hit the right switch. But my body is already halfway into the hallway. So for some reason, my mind tells me to look forward. So I turn my head and see a shadow like 2 inches from my stomach. So being sleep deprived, I just step back to not bump the shadow as it's moving. Bear in mind, it's about 5 a.m. and only me and my mum are home. My mum is asleep upstairs because, again, it's 5 a.m. Now, 5 a.m. me is stupid as hell. My mind doesn't even process what I'm looking at other than it looks like a downswing of a hand reaching out.
or a head turned so the eyes are parallel to the ground. I couldn't really tell you because fear was the only emotion that set in, but apparently not quick enough because I turned to look back at the light switch for half a second. But one of those two is correct. The first thing that processed in my mind was, wait, no one's up. And I went to look at what the heck is so close to me. Because whatever it was, I know was human, looking. Because my mind went, there's a strange man right in front of you. So I tried to focus on it, and all I'm greeted with is my sister, who's not even home. Dark doorway, and I've decided I'm never leaving my room again. Ever. I can still hear stuff bumping around in my living room, but nobody is walking around. Like I know how that feels when the floorboards shift, and how it sounds, even when someone's trying to sneak around, and I can just hear things moving like chairs being shifted, and the gate at the bottom of the stairs latch being toyed with, and small scratches and coins rattling. Again, I have so many stories, but like we have to energy cleanse our house at least 2 times a year, and I'm constantly cleansing my space because I have had problems in the past, almost like this, but not so close as to literally move out of the way thinking I was going to bump into someone. More like across the room having a staring contest with a shadow figure, or being grabbed by the waist on a couch at my dad's. But like something about actually processing it as a person in front of me really is scaring me more than like any of the other things. It was 2001, and the whole 6th grade class, about 60 kids at my school, had a week camping field trip in some redwoods a couple hours from our school. It was supposed to be a celebration for finishing elementary school. Basically, it was a week of swimming, hiking, crafts and adventure. It was great fun. On one of the last nights we were there, the camp aides took us on a night hike into the forest. There were about 5 to 10 camp counselors and teachers with flashlights, and the students got little glow sticks to hold. We first gathered in a large soccer field to get directions and organise our group. It was very dark, and we could see all the stars in the sky. We were surrounded by thick, dark forest. As I marvelled at the nature around me, I saw something white flitting about my peripheral vision. I turned to see a strange, rapidly shifting white entity. It seemed like it was glitching, the way it was sort of blinking in and out of existence. It was almost pitch black outside, yet the figure seemed to be internally lit with sparks of energy. Thinking it was my eyes adjusting to the dark, seeing floaters or ocular debris, I rubbed my eyes and blinked. I looked straight at it, expecting it to disappear, but it didn't. It actually seemed to become aware of me looking at it, as it moved back into the trees a little further when I continued to watch it move about. When I looked away, I could still see it in the corner of my eye and start to come closer. It emerged from the perimeter of the forest. At first, it looked like a humanoid diaphanous figure. Then it morphed into a wolf-like figure, running on all fours quickly. There was a good distance between me and this spirit, but I still was scared and felt sick to my stomach. I thought I was going crazy or something was wrong with my eyes at the time. I didn't believe in ghosts and had only a couple spooky encounters, like cabinets shutting randomly. Up until then, I always felt there was a logical explanation to everything. Anyway, we finally began our hike. My best friend was right next to me, but I told her nothing of this creepy-ass shifting transparent creature thing in the forest. The thought of her not being able to see it, or thinking I was crazy, was too much of a risk. To my relief, we turned away from the side of the forest where the thing was, and started to enter the forest on the opposite side. The trail was very steep. We hiked in a long line, with camp aides at the front, middle and back of our group. I was somewhere in the middle. After 15 minutes or so of hiking, I remember feeling a prickling sensation down my spine, and my stomach churned. I glanced behind me, and that's when I saw the forest thing, at the very back of the line, following us, or me. Although there were still a lot of kids in line separating me and the ghost, It was much closer than before, when I'd seen it in the woods by the field. It now had a distinctly humanoid form, although its edges seemed blurry and in still constant flux. It had no face, and if I stared at it directly, it would fade somewhat but not disappear. And like before, when looking at it peripherally, it became much more solid in form. I was scared shitless, but still said nothing to anyone. I decided my eyes were still tricking me. Once we got to the top of our destination, it was time to turn around. I saw the figure still hanging around the end of the line. The front of the line doubled back, and to my horror, I realised I would be forced to pass by the white figure. As soon as I got within 15 or 20 feet of the figure, it dissipated like steam or smoke right in front of me. I never saw it again. I didn't sleep that night in the open-air cabin and was very relieved that we were going home the next day.